I'm not presenting any research. This is a testimony, it's a story. So it's going to be intimate and subjective. I'm not just to set the stage. I'm not talking about Islam and psychedelics. What Islam says about psychedelics. This is not to talk about Islam. It's a talk from within Islam. But strangely, it actually leads us to some, at least led me to some insights about the very essence of what it means, what Islam even means. A bit of introduction, because I'm new to breaking convention, and I think I'm new to many of you. And I think the messenger is part of the message, and this is a story. A bit of background, I'm a Palestinian who was born in diaspora. I was born in the Arabian Gulf region. My father was born in the Palestinian city of Jaffa about about 4 months before the Nakba. So he was a Nakba refugee, he was a Nakba baby. Before 2011, I was really not politically active. I actually was a startup consultant. But in 2011, during the Arab Spring uprisings, I became a pretty prominent voice for democracy and human rights and liberation in the Arab region. And someone reminded me that 2011 is also when Breaking Convention came together. So I feel like there's something there. In 2014, I was arrested in my previous home in the United Arab Emirates. I was asked to leave the country, but being stateless, I had nowhere to go. So I was rendered into prison for a while. I lived in an airport for about a month because, again, I was stateless. Eventually came to Norway as I was invited to speak to a conference, and eventually I applied for asylum, received asylum. And then, immediately after that, like, okay, what do we do now? What's the next step? Where do we start? How do we continue the revolution? Of course, the hidden factor there was severe PTSD, given, Arab prisons are not really a good place, and it's not nice to spend, a month in an airport. Not to mention what happened to my family and my child, etc. So in 2017, 2017 is when the PTSD got so bad that it started to become a threat to my life. I attempted suicide. And it was really from that point that I started to really think about healing. And that brings me to this picture. But before that, I wanna talk to you a little bit and maybe get to know you a little bit. How many, by show of hands, how many people here are Muslim? Okay, I see 2, 3. Okay, how many people here are of refugee background? Okay, how many people here are stateless? How many Palestinians? Okay, hold that thought, and I'm going to comment on it at the end of like, there's a conversation that we're not having, and I think we need to have it. So 2018, I find myself, the man in the middle, I don't know if you recognize him, this is Jamal Khashoggi, who is a Saudi journalist who was assassinated at his own country's embassy in Istanbul in 2018. Jamal was an interesting figure. He was a friend, but he was kind of almost a father figure. So myself and some people around me were basically children. We were in exile without our parents, and Jamal was in exile without his children, and there was kind of like almost like surrogate father-son relationship, but not with me only, but with a lot of Arab activists. And I find myself at a table with Rick Doblin, who's with us over here. Hi, Rick. And Jamal, and I was introducing Jamal Khashoggi to Rick, and talking about Jamal himself basically had PTSD and had questions, etc., etc. I did not know that this was the last time I would meet Jamal, because he would be assassinated a few months later, and the assassination, of course, was big news, and it was very, very gruesome. He was suffocated and then dismembered, and parts of his body was taken to Saudi Arabia as proof of his death. And there was a big, it was during the first Trump administration, and Biden said we're going to do something about it, then nothing happened. So as it happens, it was this conference where I started to speak to Rick about psychedelics and psychedelics for PTSD. Can we go to the next slide? Yeah. So, no, we're a little bit, can we go? Yeah. So as it happens, I had my first MDMA-assisted self-therapy session 2 weeks after Jamal's murder. And this was an experience of love, of surrender, but also an experience of rage. And I remember going back. I mean, at that point, I'm still a stateless refugee. I remember going back home and my facilitator being a little confused because she's like, most people don't feel this much rage after their session. And I'm like, I'm not only enraged about Jamal, but I'm also enraged about the fact that I had to live my entire life as a refugee. And I so normalized the experience of going back and being, pulled aside from the line at the passport control and interrogated and treated as a criminal. And that was such a normal part of travel for me that, it was just like hidden to the background. However, the period after, the first session, even though it was very fraught, crazy story that happened at the same time was that, the Trump administration the first Trump administration was basically trying to find a way to get the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, off the hook. And it just happened that apparently there was indications that Saudi Arabia had received technical help from Israel when it comes to spyware, the ability to hack phones. And apparently, Mohammed bin Salman had met with Jeff Bezos, who at the time was the employer of Jamal Khashoggi, because Jamal Khashoggi worked for the Washington Post. I know, a complicated story, but try to focus a little bit. So Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, thought that he could hack Jeff Bezos' phone and then blackmail him into saying, you know what, let it go. Let the Washington Post stop its coverage and its outrage over the murder. So as it happens in 2019, I get actually an email from someone who works for Jeff Bezos' team. And he's like, hey, you seem to know a lot about this, because I was like writing about this on Twitter. And I was like, maybe we should work together. Full disclosure, I've never met Jeff Bezos. I've never communicated with him directly. I don't think it's good for my reputation, to be honest, to be associated, someone who's talking about liberation. I don't think I want to be associated with billionaires. But essentially, I started to work on this very deep investigation, and as a result of that, in somewhere around April of 2019, agents of the Norwegian intelligence services knocked on the door and they said, we need to take you into protection. I was like living in Oslo. And they said, there's an attempt on your life. So I had to live under protection for several years because apparently the Saudis not satisfied with one murder, they wanted to actually kill me as well. That incident itself also meant something for my family because I could always go and travel and see them. They lived in Malaysia at the time, and then I couldn't see them anymore. So like basically there was a disconnection with my family. That kind of is the background here, but keep in mind that during this time, it's very, very dark events, but I'm still living in the afterglow of my first MDMA therapy session, and I'm actually improving in every way. So my self-care has improved. I lost a lot of weight. My stress levels are down. I'm able to work a lot better. I'm actually loving myself. I'm actually, living with myself. I'm actually taking care of myself. So it was around maybe the summer, fall of 2019, and this was pre-COVID, and the idea was like, hey, if one session can change my life positively to this extent, what if I make this regular? What if I do this regularly? What would be the impact then? This brings me to October 2nd. October 2nd, 2019 was the first anniversary of the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And I did the stupid thing of taking psilocybin on the anniversary. And my mind replayed the entire murder in full detail. And I know a lot about the details because I worked on the case, so I know exactly like the sounds of the saw that cut his body, the thrash of his body as he was suffocated. And in that trip, I did not feel distress for Jamal at all. I was actually in distress for the souls of his killers. I was wondering, like, I was so distressed about the existence of this much evil. And I had to go through that, I had to walk through that to the other side, and I'm like, okay, can I see a world in which there's no evil? And suddenly I was in one, and it was worse than hell. It was so dark that I thought, God must be so merciful for creating something like hell, because at least in hell you know what's good and bad. In that space, there was no hell, there was no heaven, there was no good, but there's no bad, there's no evil, there's no heroes, there's no meaning. You just exist because you are. And God is some kind of cosmic tyrant who created you and then convicted you to just exist with no meaning. And I remember the end of that trip when I'm coming down, and I was like, I feel so grateful. I'm so grateful for the existence of evil. Because without evil, there's no good. And if there's no good, then there's no meaning. And if there's no meaning, then there's no meaning to what I'm doing. There's no meaning to my sacrifices, to my activism. And from that moment, this feeling of fear towards people who do things like the people who killed Jamal turned into a feeling of pity, a feeling of sympathy, a feeling of, I'm glad, if this drama of the cosmos needs both good and evil in order to play out, I'm so glad that I'm not on their side. Can we go to the next slide? So anyway, COVID hits around the same time that I got enough of a supply to actually do this regularly. It was both MDMA and psilocybin. And this is when weird things started happening, because it was around the same time as, political context. This was 2019, 2020, second Trump administration. Things got darker towards the end. And I started to get visits from prophetic archetypes. Keep in mind that there's this heavy symbology when it comes to my dad, my son. My father's name is Ismail, who is also the name of a prophet in the Islamic tradition. My father's mother, her name is Hajar or Hagar, who, according to the Islamic tradition, I think also the Jewish tradition, was the mother of Ismail. And my son, I called him Ismail. I named him Ismail on the day that I was arrested, because I knew that he's going to be a refugee baby, just like his grandfather and the prophet Ismail. He's going to live in exile, and he might not speak his family's language, and I wanted to give him a connection to all of this. But then my grandfather, the grandfather that I know, my grandfather on my mom's side, his name is Abraham. So there was this kind of like symbology around this, and so like as I integrated this, boundaries started to blur, because my ability to have spiritual experiences no longer became dependent on the drug or the medicine. So I was able to access this kind of space during meditation, during prayer, sometimes during dreams, or just when you're about to fall asleep. And this is something I think I actually was several presentations talked about dreams as a truth space, and actually Islam and Muslims actually believe that a lot. Muslims take their dreams very seriously. This was around the same time as political events, certain political events were happening, and I think it's specifically around Palestine. This was basically around the Abrahamic Accords. Can we go to the next slide to see? Okay, let's go back. Yeah. I started to reach for language to help me process or integrate what's going on. I mean, because spiritual experiences, when they start, are terrifying. You don't know what's happening. Like, you don't know how to interpret what's happening. And I found myself just reaching for language. Keep in mind, this is COVID. You can't travel. You can't see people. And I found it that instinctively, I mean, I'm lucky enough to have a certain familiarity, really broad familiarity with the Islamic tradition, whether it is the theological tradition or the Sufi mystical tradition. And I automatically found myself using Sufi language to explain, to describe what I'm doing. And sometimes it's me basically reaching, but then finding that, wait, this language really, really works. and going with the language that works. Of course, the point here is that Islam literally means submission, and when I'm starting a lot of these trips, I'm actually telling myself, talking to myself, saying, Aslim, submit. So it's Islaming. Islam becomes a verb. Can we go to the next slide? So I'm talking now about the different phase here where, this is post-COVID, and I started to think about, like, well, how do I integrate this? How do we work this? So I had created an organization called the Kawaakibi Center in Oslo. This was basically people who are survivors of the 2011 Arab Spring uprisings. We kind of realized that, a lot of us have similar experiences, and we kind of, eventually landed, maybe not smoothly, maybe not, it's rough landing, but again, we survived. Like, a lot of our comrades never survived. A lot of them either died or they ended up in prison or, suppressed, etc. So we came together. It was basically immediately, the project kind of, the strategy kind of wrote itself. This is what we have to do. But also there was a realization that liberation has, like, the revolution has to grow. It's not about just Arabs or Egyptians, Palestinians, Libyans, etc. We have to be speaking about collective liberation. We realize that the systems that we're up against are not only these dictators, but really there's a global system of oppression that we have to be up against. 2023, so we started this program called the Shifa program, which is at Kawaakibi. I have several members of my team over here. We did not want to fetishize the psychedelic itself. So basically, Shifa is a word that means healing. It's actually a word that exists in several Middle Eastern languages. And we wanted to say this is about healing, not about psychedelics. Psychedelics is one method, it's one modality, it's not everything. In 2023, there was this collapse. I received Norwegian citizenship. And for the first time in generations, it was my great-grandfather who became, during the Nakba, it was my grandfather and my great-grandfather. So, 4 generations of statelessness ended in that moment. And it was, you'd think that I would be happy, but actually it was extremely difficult. Because I felt, I had to go there and pick up this passport, drop my refugees travel document and pick up the Norwegian passport. And my hand couldn't move. Because I didn't feel like I'm actually gaining an identity, but losing one. Being a refugee is supposed to be a phase. You become a refugee and then you gain citizenship and then you stop being a refugee. But for some people, like the Palestinian people, it's become part of our identity. It's part of the experience of being Palestinian. And so I'm thinking I'm thinking about not only myself, but I'm thinking about everyone who would not make it, everyone who will die stateless. As it happens, this was in June 2023. That's exactly when I was able to have a passport and therefore see my father, see my family. My father was elderly, he was frail, and it was clear, maybe I didn't want to believe it, but it was clear that his time is coming to an end. As it happened, I go back to Oslo, and within a few weeks, it's the October 7th attack, and then the genocide, and then rupture of community, collapse of community, because what happened after that was not just about what's happening in Gaza, but what's happening in the world around us. March of 2024, I received the call, your father is dying and you need to come. He was dying for 10 days. We're next to him, and I was very lucky that I was there to feel his last heartbeat, to feel his last breath, and to bury him. And then the time since then has been basically connecting with grief. And I realized that since his death, or really since my exile, since 2014, I haven't grieved him, I was carrying him. And this happened a few weeks ago when I actually had another session, and the message was, you need to put me down. It's enough, you need to put me down, and just be free, just look into the future, because you're talking about liberation, you have to be free from me as well. And that's what I'm trying to do right now. I'm trying to talk about how grief itself is liberation, how grief is necessary. Grief as political grief is the end of delusion. It's the act before uprising. It's when we grieve, and when we grieve, that opens up our vision of the future. And I feel like a lot of what's happening with Israel-Palestine is ungrieved trauma. I think Palestinians have not grieved the Nakba, and that's why that blocks their imagination of the future. And I think there's something of that also happening on the other side. Can we go to the next one? Very quick reflections. I don't want to. I want to keep some time for questions and answers, etc. But then, what did I speak? I didn't speak about Islam here, right? I encourage you to look up Shahab Ahmed, who wrote an excellent book called What is Islam? And he defines Islam as this: hermeneutical engagement with revelation as text, pretext, and context. I'm not going to go too much into this, but what he's trying to say here is that Islam makes Muslims, and then Muslims make themselves in term of Islam, literally in term of, as in using the language of Islam. So what I was doing here is trying to give meaning, make meaning in terms of Islam, in Islamic language. Islam makes Muslims, and then Muslims make Islamic tradition. And that is passed on to the next generation. Next is this idea of Sufi language and the universality of the experience. I think this is something that was always a question for me, but now I see it, that the spiritual experience, regardless of theology, is surprisingly uniform across different traditions. And that's why Sufi language worked, but I could have used any other language. Sufi language was just basically the one that's more available to me. Next is basically this shift in my own practice of religion from the theological to the experiential to the spiritual. So theology for me became more like a tool, and if you care too much about theology, then you don't get it. Theology is merely a tool, and if you confuse the tool with what you're using the tool for, then you're really lost. Finally, let's talk about what we're not talking about, which is the lack of diversity in this space. People of my background, people who are Muslim, people who look like me and pray like me and speak like me are really I think 80%, more than 80, maybe 85% of people or presenters here are not of my background. And I think this is, inclusion is really not about, it's not charity, it's about excellence. So we come with a certain worldview, we come with a certain philosophy. Like, for example, Annette, you mentioned Leonard Cohen. That actually was Rumi. So Rumi was the one who said, the wound is where the light enters you. So basically, Leonard Cohen basically took that. And we also talk about Judeo-Christian, but we don't talk about Judeo-Christian Islamic, because really, among the Abrahamic traditions, I think it's Judaism and Islam are very similar. They're very, very similar theological systems. It's actually Christianity that's the odd one out between them. So really, we need to speak about Judeo-Islamic and Judeo-Christian Islamic, because sometimes we use Judeo-Christian in order to exclude Muslims. I'm not saying this with hostility. Just basically, this is what we need for collective liberation. That's it. Thank you.